friends. Welcome back to Joy in the Journey, where we help you find joy in every day. We are going to be using a Bible study guide that I have created for you. So if you are watching this in Joy in the Journey, you can find the Bible study guide in the files in Joy in the Journey. But you will see, and I have written some notes on mine, but this is the very first page. And what it does is it breaks down each topic that I've put on here. So scripture reference, what does this mean right here? And all of that. It breaks down each topic, and I'm going to go over them with you guys today. So the first thing at the top, you will see where it says scripture reference. And what I've done is I've actually put that at the top of every page. That way, if your papers get lost or something like that, you won't get confused as to what scripture you have made notes about. So the OT/NT, that's just Old Testament or New Testament. That's just where it's found. So next you'll see author. And there's two things that you might want to note here. First of all, the first thing is who actually wrote the scripture that you're reading. But the second thing is for you to note if there's a different person speaking. So for example, in the book of Matthew, it was written by Matthew, but there's lots of places where Jesus is speaking. So you may want to put, the author of the book or the verse is Matthew, but Jesus is speaking, so just make a little note of that so that you're aware. Or if he's, quoting another disciple or, something like that. And that way you have a little bit more context. The next thing you'll see is audience. So who is the originally intended audience? So if it's Jesus that's speaking, who's he speaking to? Is he speaking to his disciples, or is he speaking to a multitude of Gentiles, or, a multitude of believers, or, that sort of thing? Because that makes a difference in, the context of what you're reading. And the next thing you'll see is context. So some things you'll want to consider when you're writing your notes about context is, where was the author when this was written? So Paul, for example, was in prison when he wrote many books of the Bible. So that will kind of change what we know about the context. What activities was the person engaged in? Okay. Were they watching Jesus be crucified? Were they fishing? Were they out in the middle of the sea on a fishing boat? What were they doing when they wrote the scripture? And what seemed to be their emotional state? And a lot of times you'll find this at like the beginning of the chapter or the beginning of the particular book that you're reading. But just kind of getting in like the mindset of the author of what you're reading will help you gain a little bit more knowledge about that particular scripture. And the next thing you'll see is practical application. So there are two aspects of practical application. There's the application of the time that it was written. So what actions did the author intend for the listener to take at the time the scripture was spoken? And then practical application now. What actions does the author intend for the present day reader to take? What are the literal and spiritual applications? Okay, so you guys have heard me say this many times when we're reading scripture. There's often very literal applications, very literal things the Bible is telling us to do, but there's also many times an overlay of a spiritual context that we can take away from what the scripture is saying. Next thing is keywords and definitions. So what are some keywords in the scripture? So for example, Psalms 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me. So some keywords in that would be create, clean, heart, renew, spirit. Those would be some things I would consider key words. And sometimes the key words have to do with the topic that you're studying. So if I'm studying about the Spirit of God, I'm going to be looking for those keywords that are more geared towards the Spirit. If I'm talking about faith, I'm going to be looking for keywords that are geared more towards faith. whatever topic I'm looking for. What are their definitions? So next week I'm going to kind of go through and show you guys how to find some definitions. But definitions can include the original Greek and Hebrew words that are used, but they can also be our present day, words and meanings. And then the next thing you'll see underneath there is cross references. So when we talk about cross references, we're talking about what other scriptures contain the same keywords. Do those scriptures have the same or similar meanings, or the same or similar story? So, you can lay out different stories. For example, the story of Job, he lost everything and he still chose to serve God. Well, so did the 3 Hebrew boys. They were thrown in the fiery furnace and they chose still, regardless of what king was going to do to them, they were still going to serve God. So those are 2 similar stories, and you can take them and look for different cross references there. Also with cross references, do the scriptures with the same keywords bring new aspects or applications to the scripture you're studying? So, I find this scripture about faith over here, and it's talking about, having faith in the hard times. And then I find this other scripture about faith, and it's talking about having faith to move mountains. So those 2 scriptures do have similar applications, right? So those are things you'll want to think about when you're thinking about different cross-reference scriptures. And then what other scriptures speak to the same issues or issues that are similar? And then on the last page, I just gave you plenty of space for additional notes. And this is where you're going to really write like your personal feelings about that scripture. What are your personal thoughts or takeaways from the scripture? So going back to Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me. So for me personally, that is something that really speaks to me, because I want God to create that clean heart in me, because I feel like if my heart is clean, then I can better serve Him. I can better serve others. People can better see God through me. And so those are some things that I would write down in those additional notes. How does this scripture affect me emotionally? Well, that Psalm 51:10 makes me check myself. Do I have a right spirit? Does God need to clean some stuff out of my heart? And how can you apply it to your own life? Going back, create in me a clean heart. Well, God can create in me a clean heart. Sometimes I got to do stuff for myself. So that life application would be, maybe I need to, stop watching a certain movie, or stop, looking at things on the internet that I shouldn't be looking at, or, whatever it is. That would be how I would apply it to my own personal life. And that's what the additional notes page is for. So, having said all of that, I'm so excited for you guys to join with me next week. Now, if you watch this video and you have a particular scripture you would like for me to go over and kind of break down, let me know. Just post it in the comments. And I'm so excited, and thank you all so much for joining me on this journey. And I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you again soon.